and welcome back. In this lecture, we learn about dropping access and interpolation. So far we have seen how to deal with missing data. If we have any missing data, we know how to remove those missing data or how to fill the missing data. In this lecture, we'll see how we can drop a missing data by using the drop NA method. Okay, let's look at our previous data frame. We have our data frame and then data frame 1 object. So here our data frame 1, we have missing data in columns 1, 2, and 3. And by passing an axis argument, we can specify which rows or columns to drop. For instance, if we want to drop any row that has missing data or no value, NN value, we can simply pass an axis and set it to be equal to 0. Let's look at that. So data frame 1 that we'll call the drop NA method and then pass an axis parameter and set it to be equal to 0. Axis is equal to 0 means x-axis. Now we are left with one row only, since that row doesn't have any missing data or no value. Okay? And if we want to drop any column that has a missing data or no value, instead of 0, we pass axis and set it to be equal to 1. So data frame 1 we call drop NA and then pass an axis parameter and set it to be 1. Now we are left with only column 4. We can also call the drop NA method on a specific column. For instance, we can call that on column 2. So we can say data frame 1 and then select column 2 and call the drop NA method on it. So it will drop. Now we have D, E, F. So the other ones have NA value. Where is column 2? So we are left with D, E, F. The other ones are dropped. Great. Next, let's look at interpolation. Interpolation. So both data frames and series have this interpolation method. Let's create some series and data frames and show you this interpolation. Let's create a simple series and save it in a variable called SS. pd.series, and let's pass a list of numbers. Let's say 0. We'll use NumPy's NaN method to create a no value, and let's say 20. And for index, we'll pass a list of numbers. Let's say 0, 2, and 20. Let's call our series object. So we have 3 index, 0, 2, and 20. Then values 0, no value, and 20. So if we call the interpolate method on this, it will fill this missing data or no value data by interpolating the result here. So let's do that. We have our series object and then we simply call the interpolate method. So now the no value will be replaced with 10. See, now the no value is 10. Oh, that's how interpolation works. just takes the difference between those two and then takes the average or the median. So 0, 10, 20. If our value at index 20 was 100, this no value would be 50. So that's how interpolation works. And this interpolation accepts an optional argument called method, and we can set that to be equal to values. So in that case, when we do interpolation, the missing data will take the value of the index. So in this case, the missing data will take the value 2. Let's look at that. So it says that we'll call the interpolate method on our series object, then pass the method argument and set it to be equal to values. In this case, our missing data is 2. Great. Next, let's look at interpolation on data frames. Let's create a data frame and we'll save it in a variable called data frame, pd.dataframe, and let's use a dictionary to create our data frame. Let's say key, A will be our key, and for values we'll pass a list of numbers. Let's say 2, 3.3. Let's have missing data 5.2, 6.4, 7.2. Let's pass another key and value combo. Let's have P as our key, and for our values we'll pass a list of numbers. Let's say 8, no value, np.nan. Let's have another no value, np.nan. Let's say 18, 29, let's say 40 maybe. Okay, let's look at our data frame. Let's save it in data frame 2. Let's look at our data frame 2 object. So we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have a 6x2 data frame. What we'll do next is call the interpolate method on our data frame so that it will fill out all the missing data. For instance, the value for column A at index 2 will be, so it will take the difference between those two, which is almost 2. So it will take the median value or the mean between the average between 3.3 and 5.2, which is close to 4.3. So that will be the value here, and then it will do the same for these two missing data on our column B. So the difference between 8 and 18 is 10. So this values will be maybe 11 and 14, something like that. So let's see that. So we'll call the interpolate method on our data frame 2 object, interpolate. Let's run it. Okay, so we guessed 4.3. Now the missing data is replaced with 4.25, and then same thing for the column B missing data, right? 11.3 and then 14.667. And this interpolate method also accepts an optional parameter called limit, and by passing a certain number to this limit, we can set which of the missing data to be replaced or filled or interpolated. Okay, and we can apply this limit to both series and data frames. Let's create another series object and then show you this limit argument. And I'll save this in a variable called ss pd.series. Then let's pass a list of numbers and missing data. So np.nan, 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 let's say 7, np.nan, 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 and let's say 24. So if we call our series object, we have about 8 indexes and 6 missing data or no values. So let's apply the interpolate method. So series.interpolate, and then so if we simply apply the interpolate method, it will fill all the values. You see here between 7 and 24. So these 3 missing data are filled. But we can pass the limit parameter and set it to be, let's say, to 1. In this case, it will only fill the missing data at index number 4. Let's run this. You see here, only index number 4 is filled. So by default, the limit argument by default, it limits interpolation in the forward direction only. Okay, and if we want to fill the previous data also, to interpolate this missing data, we have to apply a second parameter called limit direction, and we'll have to set that to backward. Let's look at an example of that. So in this case, we call our interpolate method and then set the limit to, let's say, 1, and then we pass the second optional parameter called limit direction, and we'll set that to backward. So in this case here, it's filled with 7. You see the previous value is filled with 7. Since there is no higher value, it will take the previous data, the previous value. So unlike what we saw here or here, you see, so between 7 and 24 there were 3 missing data. When it does interpolation backwards, it put 19.75, whereas here above 7 there is no data to interpolate, there is no value to interpolate, so it repeats the value before it. Similarly, if the value at index 7 was no value, when it does interpolation, indexes 5, 6, 7 will keep being 777, which is the previous value. And then we can change this interpolation and limit it to, let's say, 2. So now 2 of the, let's call our series object one more time. You see here we have our series and limit is 2 and interpolation is backwards, so it fills those 2. So it goes backwards from index 3 and then fills the missing data or interpolates the missing data at 2 and 1, and same thing here, 5 and 6. So that's the values here. And if we want the interpolation to happen in both directions, we can pass this limit direction argument or parameter and set it to be equal to both. That way it will fill the missing data in both directions. Let's look at an example of that. So series that we call the interpolate method on our series object, and then limit, let's limit it to 1, and then we'll set the limit direction to be equal to both. Now you see it goes both in both directions. Okay, and we can change this limit values to, let's say, 2. Then it will fill more NA values or missing data. If we set it to 3, now all the missing data are interpolated. This is how we can use the interpolate method to interpolate any missing data in our series or data frame. So to summarize what we have seen in this lecture, we saw that we can drop any rows or columns containing missing data by using the drop NA method, and we can also do interpolation on series and data frames by using the interpolate method. And this interpolate method accepts optional arguments like limit and limit direction.